Hi, my name is Crystal, and I want to welcome you to our second edition of the Ghost Warrior Society's YouTube channel. And today I'm just going to be talking generally about some of the issues that we are looking at here at the Ghost Warrior Society, some of the areas we are concentrating on. So as you know, the Ghost Warrior Society refers to Indigenous people in Canada. We are speaking specifically to First Nations, Red River, Métis, and Inuit in Canada. And we are a collective, a grassroots collective, and we come together on a regular basis and have been for years. Recently, we started up our sector-specific Zooms, and these Zooms include the arts and culture sector, the academic sector, and the repatriation sector, in addition to general meetings and investigations. So let's just go through these particular sectors and exactly the kinds of issues that they are looking at and trying to, develop toolkits from. The first would be the academic sector. We have held a few academic Zoom sessions, and these sessions are for verified Indigenous people who are involved or have been involved or have experiences with post-secondary institutions in Canada, and specifically in dealing with Indigenous content at our finest halls of learning. Some of the issues that we are dealing with in the academic sector is the abnormally large amount of people who are teaching and leading academic departments, Indigenous departments, who are not actually Indigenous. Some of the most notable cases that we can think of in recent history include the case of Carrie Barassa from the University of Saskatchewan, who was found, in fact, to not be Indigenous at all. She had claimed to be Métis, but she was, in fact, Russian and of no Indigenous ancestry. Yet she was a very prominent figure and led the Indigenous health sciences at the University of Saskatchewan for, I believe, a period of 14 years. And there is also the case of Jan Timmins out of Memorial University in Newfoundland, who received a 2019 Inspire Award for education as a Mi'kmaq educator. However, she was also found to have no Indigenous ancestry. When she was finally asked to move on from Memorial University, she walked away with a severance package of around $675,000 alone. So there is a lot of financial gain to be had in these academic institutions here in Canada by claiming Indigenous, because nobody seems to check if these people are actually Indigenous. And I think that is one of the celebrations of the Pretendian, is that nobody actually checks. But guess what? The Ghost Warrior Society is here, and we are now checking. We are now looking for truth in the claims put forth by academic people in these institutions across our country. We are looking for truth in our statements, and if we find none, we say so. That is one huge area. The second area is research related to academic institutions. A lot of academic institutions, such as Simon Fraser University and the University of Ottawa and so many others, simply accept the issue of self-identification as Indigenous as a means to determine Indigenous identity. This is not adequate by any means. Self-identification is a system that is ripe for failure and exploitation. And I realized this in 24 years ago. And here we are in 2024. And yes, the self-identification of Indigenous identity has been exploited and has failed miserably in determining Indigenous identity. Those are some of the prominent issues in the academic stream. The next stream is the stream of arts and culture. Arts and culture refers to many embedded issues, such as cultural appropriation, such as artists who are receiving grants. This also refers to the music industry, in which a lot of people are accessing Indigenous specific funding and resources but through a very frail claim to various Indigenous identities, mainly Métis, also Mi'kmaq, and these identities shift over time, but they seem very, attractive to the Pretendian because, again, nobody's checking. Nobody is checking and verifying, authenticating these claims of Indigenous identity. And that is a huge problem because people who come from marginalized Indigenous communities and nations really need those resources. They are vital in bridging the gap that exists for Indigenous people in Canada. The other and one of the most important arenas of our work focuses on repatriation. Repatriation refers to bringing back 60 Scoop survivors, Indian residential school survivors, and other people who have been genuinely displaced by colonial policy, and bringing them back into their Indigenous communities and nations, and reforming relationships and forming their identity, reclaiming their identity. So 60 Scoop survivors, Indian residential school survivors, millennial Scoop survivors, survivors of really bad child welfare policy and other colonial displacements, such as relocation, having to relocate for education, and so many others. There's a lot of factors that result in the displacement of Indigenous people. The repatriation process is lacking in Canada as it stands now. 60 Scoop survivors and other displaced people really have a lot of barriers in trying to reintegrate into Indigenous spaces and communities. One of these things is actually just the stigma of our adoptive names. My adopted name is Cameron, and when I did the 2018 Finding Cleo podcast, I used my adopted name of Christine Cameron. I applied for a job in Toronto at an Indigenous agency using that name, and when I did not qualify for an interview, I went in to ask, why did I not get an interview? The director of that said institution informed me that he asked around about me and nobody knew me. And to which I informed him that I was a 60 Scoop survivor and was I was at a disadvantage by using my adoptive name. And I told him that in the future, that if he had any questions about my Indigenous identity or my origin, that he should have asked me and considered me on the basis of my membership and my current relation to my Indigenous community and nation, rather than asking people who will not know me by my adoptive name. That is just one of the issues that we are speaking of. The other issue with repatriation is making sure that those avenues and those pathways, those doors are open in Indigenous nations, communities, organizations, and institutions that exist across the country. Welcoming 60 Scoop survivors and recognizing that we are very traumatized people and we may require additional supports to make that reintegration, to make that journey back to our home, possible. That these additional supports may include, having a support person, having additional resources, having perhaps a liaison or, an agency or a person designated for, say, a tribal council or a collective or an agency that is specific to the issues of repatriation and all of the outcomes and all of the states of being that we have when we're coming back to our communities. This includes mental health supports, addiction supports, housing supports, our lack of ties to our Indigenous community. As Indigenous people, we are known for having extended families and for having a great, labyrinth and extended family of people that we can access, resources. We have our First Nation or our settlements. We have our Indigenous family, our extended family, our community, our nation. We have all of these supports. And navigating this Yes, I've called it a labyrinth because if you've grown up within your Indigenous family and nation, then you know the supports, you know who to ask. 60 scoopers do not have that information at the ready, and therefore it can be a challenge for us to navigate how we get those services and programs to which we are entitled. And that's why I say it would be nice to have an interim, a liaison, somebody specifically designated to repatriation in all of these institutions that are there for our benefit. The other issues of repatriation means support for actual survivors, for our extended families, for our spouses, for those who would be coming in contact with us. So we are dealing with a lot of issues that are embedded within the issue of Indigenous identity fraud. And it's really important that we come together on a regular basis to speak about it and to help each other and to learn from each other, and so that we can develop toolkits and be better equipped and more knowledgeable and share our common experiences and to share our common strategies. I'm going to close off this video by saying that last year we wanted 2 strategies to combat Indigenous identity fraud. The first was a detailed introduction when coming into new spaces and meeting new people. And that detailed introduction would include our name, our family, our biological family, our communities of origin, our nation of origin, and how we held our Indigenous space. These detailed introductions would be offered in kindness and respect, and then we would wait for that response, that same detailed response, to come back with us. And this way we can situate ourselves in relation to each other, in relation to our nationhood, and make links and make connections. Because we are, it is a small world, and that is how we orientate ourselves within creation, by making friends and making those connections. The second strategy we used was to take away the stigma of asking questions. Asking questions is vital, especially when we're authenticating those who had come into our community spaces, and perhaps spend time with those of us who might be vulnerable, such as children, youth, elders, disabled. So it's important that we ask questions, and we must not be called bullies or be accused of being laterally violent if we are asking those questions. So we want to promote the right to ask questions. It's another way in which we can orientate ourselves in our Indigenousness, in our Indigenous selves, to be our best Indigenous selves. Communication is important. And communication must be respectful, it must be kind, it must be thorough, and we always have to attempt to communicate. Communication is very, very important. So I want to thank you for the second edition of our Ghost Warrior Society YouTube channel. Thank you for tuning in, and in the future I will be reporting more on some of the work that is achieved by the Ghost Warrior Society in all of these sectors: the academic, the arts and culture, repatriation. Future plans include taking a look at social media and how we share information online that can be harvested, misused, and misrepresented within Indigenous identity fraud, the Pretendians. There are so many issues to look at, but there are so many of us that want to make a change, that want to make a positive change, that want to take back our Indigenous spaces and bring truth back to those Indigenous spaces. And this is important and should be supported. As a final word, I must say, we have absolutely no resources. The GhostWarriorSociety.com is something that I believe in, and I've been paying myself for a year to ensure that is available online for the purposes of education. There are absolutely no resources available to combat Indigenous identity fraud. However, the irony that the Pretendian can access all kinds of funding, resources, awards, positions, places of authority and money based on based on false claims, that irony has not been lost on us. Not at all. So please, would you take a little look at GhostWarriorSociety.com, and on each of the pages you will find a spot, a place in which to make a donation. We welcome donations because it pays for our membership into various databases, which we need to complete our research and our education. So thank you for tuning in. Have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you in our 3rd episode. Thank you.